Hello, friend. Thanks for joining me for another book chat. Today, let's spend a few minutes with The Vicar of Wakefield, a work of fiction by Oliver Goldsmith that was originally published back in 1766. So I'm not sure exactly how this book came on my reading radar. I think I saw it referenced somewhere, and I really like sort of village dramas, family dramas from the 19th century. I had never read one from the 18th century, so I wanted to give this one a read. I read up on this book a little bit on the publication history, and apparently it was very popular when it was published and continued popular throughout the 19th century. And I believe it's been referenced in some other literary works like Emma by Jane Austen and A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, among other things. So it remained popular for a good while. So what's it about? It's about, basically, like I said, it's a family drama. I would say more so than a village drama. The story revolves around the Primrose family. The head of the family is Dr. Charles Primrose, who's the vicar in a country parish, who lives comfortably with his wife, Deborah, his oldest son, George, his daughters, Olivia and Sophia, and then 3 younger children. So the vicar's actually pretty well off. He inherited some money from a relative in the past, which has allowed him to live quite comfortably with his family. In fact, his salary of around, I think it's around £35, he actually donates to widows and orphans of clergy. So when I first met Dr. Primrose, the vicar, I thought this character was going to be rigid and moralistic, because that's sort of how he came across to me initially. He likes to fuss over church doctrine. One of his favorite topics is monogamy. He believes that a person can only be married once, period. That's it. And he stubbornly argues this point with his neighbor back and forth about the points of dogma, this point of dogma. But anyway, over the course of the novel, I actually learned that the vicar is not quite so rigid as I had originally thought he was going to be, or dogmatic, and that he's actually quite sweet-tempered as well as forgiving. So speaking of forgiveness, this reminds me of something that happens through the course of the book that I'm not going to give away. So spoilers, I'm going to be very careful in this book to not give away anything that I think would detract from a first-time reader's experience with the book. Even though this book is over 250 years old, I wasn't aware of the plot, so there is some twists and turns that take place during the course of this family drama, and I am not going to give anything away that I think would detract from this reading experience. So, as I said, the vicar has come into an inheritance earlier on, but early in the novel, he learns that his fortune has been lost. It's been mismanaged somehow by his broker or his investor. So this, of course, throws the family into quite a bit of chaos and disarray, and the first victim of this event is his oldest son, George. Now, George had already finished his education, I believe at Oxford, and he was engaged to be married. In fact, the marriage is rapidly approaching. However, with the fall in fortune of the family of his prospective wife cancels the engagement, as he is considered no longer a suitable match for their daughter. And so the vicar sends George off to London to earn a living as best he can, and because they can't really afford to keep him as well, so George goes off to London. The rest of the family, though, need to move, so they need to change locations, and the vicar gets a house that's in a smaller, more humble kind of parish that is on the land of a man called Squire Thornhill. So Squire Thornhill is a known womanizer. We hear rumors of this from really the very beginning as they're making their way to their new house. The locals, sort of fill them in on Squire Thornhill. He's the nephew of Sir William Thornhill, who was actually known for his goodness and generosity, sort of in opposition to the reputation of his nephew, Squire Thornhill. But also early in their move, actually on their way to their house, they meet a poor and eccentric. They make a poor and eccentric friend of Mr. Burchill. So Mr. Burchill, actually, one of the daughters, she falls into some water and she's like drowning. Mr. Burchill saves her, and of course that endears him and wins him the admiration of the entire family. So he soon becomes a regular visitor there in their new house. And his mutual attraction to the daughter Sophia is really evident to all, but not really pleasurable to all. Mrs. Primrose is not too happy about this potential match at all. Deborah Primrose feels that Mr. Burchill is not good enough for her daughters. Even though now that the fortunes of their family have shifted, she thinks it's practical, actually, it's because of this, for her daughters to marry as well as they can. She also hadn't quite got the memo that her family is also not that well off, right? But there's a quote here that sort of illustrates that. This is the vicar actually speaking. My wife observing as we went that she liked him extremely, and protesting that if he had birth and fortune to entitle him to match into such a family as ours, she knew no man she would sooner fix upon. I could not but smile to hear her talk in this lofty strain, but I was never much displeased with those harmless delusions that tend to make us more happy. So Deborah, Mrs. Primrose, is really sort of holding on to this delusion that her family still has this social standing that they had before. But I thought that was pretty cool. So I won't give away the plot from there. Let's just say that the fortunes of the family continues to shift, and shifts several more times and in a couple of different ways, and before it's all said and done. There is a fraud, there's false identities, and there's even an elaborate plot of abduction. Not going to go into the details, though, but there's a lot that happens to this family, this sort of simple family. And thoughts and themes, that was really my main takeaway, I think, from the book, was the simplicity of the story. The characters in this story are not all that complex. And sometimes, when you're reading, that's a good thing. I don't want all my fiction that I read to be complex or literary. So it's kind of nice sometimes to have just sort of more of a simple story. The vicar, living in his simple and unsophisticated life of goodness, nevertheless, comes across some pretty unsavory characters that are not so simple. They're not as unsophisticated as he is, and not as good as he is as well. The modern reader, like me, I might not see myself directly in this situation since it was more than 250 years ago and in a place and time from that distant past. But nevertheless, there are some themes that are really pretty timeless, and one of them is like family. Family members really care, that love each other, stick together, they care for each other, no matter what happens to the individual members. Some of the members here fall into, let's say, disrepute. And nevertheless, others might shun this person, but the family that loves them still, is there for them. So that was sort of a timeless sort of aspect, I think. So yes, there is a pretty big scandal that ends up happening. So the modern reader, I think, would also recognize those who lie, cheat, con artists of various kinds, who will seek to ruin you, seek your ruin for their gain or for their pleasure even. And these types of bad people still exist today, obviously. And, some of these bad people are hopelessly debauched, and others aren't. Others are capable of redemption and forgiveness. So, this was a fun and easy read, and I'm glad I gave it a go. I think I will stop the chat with that. My next chat is going to be some nonfiction, Saving the Appearances, A Study in Idolatry by Owen Barfield. This is a book about the philosophy of consciousness, and a study in idolatry is not what you're probably thinking. So I have finished this already, and I will have a chat on it coming up soon. So until next time, take care.